Welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game. With every conversation, we hope to inspire as many as possible to keep on Dungeon Mastering.
And I'm one of your hosts, DM Derrick, aka How Not to DM.
And I'm your other host, DM Neal, aka Jote Maniac. And today we're going to have another one of our Raw Real Monsters episodes. It's been far too long, and once I found out that our guest had a zoology degree, I knew there was no other choice than going back to this series, dancing with the ones that brought us, and me having to once again look up Roman numerals. Even though 20 should have been very easy for me to figure out, my confidence level gets very low when I start to make the episode title.
So here we are, 294 Raw Real Monsters XX. That's 20 again, like Neal said, for you Roman numeral aficionados. And today we're talking to our friend Diana of the Rose.
And we're going to be talking about the flying horror, which if you've read the Ravnica book, you'll know exactly where that's from. And if you haven't, that likely means your players haven't, and it's going to be a terrifying monster for you to drop on them.
Yeah, horrors are big in the Magic the Gathering mythology, and so in the Ravnica guide, obviously, they've got a few different versions of different kinds of horrors that you can throw at your players, but the winged horror in particular is one that was near and dear to Diana's heart, and you'll find out soon why.
But before that, patrons, past, present, and future, we have something to ask of you, because we have a survey. You'll find a link to that in the show notes, asking about what would be the kind of things that you would want to see us use, make, do, for the Patreon. We just want to find out what you all think would be something that would benefit you the most. Is it more behind the scenes content with our guests? Is it more homebrewed material that we come up with that we put out for you? Is it more of the actual plays? Is it something that we haven't even thought of?
And on the listener's side, we want to learn more about which episode types are most helpful for you, which guests you've really enjoyed and which guests you really want to see on the show, and that kind of thing. And as a special treat for all of you listeners, if you go and fill out the survey, you will be entered to win a $25 gift card from our friend at Adventure Dice. We're giving away 2 of these gift cards, so there are going to be 2 winners. We'll announce them live on the show at the end of July. But again, in order to be entered, head to the episode notes or our link tree and fill out our listener survey. And the link tree is linktree.com/DMS_block. It'll be the first link there, listener survey.
And I know you're all dying to get your own set of Moose on the Loose dice.
All right, Neal, with all of that, let's dive into the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
The black meat's back on the menu, boys.
And today, for the meat, we are very excited to welcome Diana of the Rose to the show. Diana is a TTRPG nerd who multiclassed into pretty much everything else. And as a creator myself, I can agree with that statement. It tends to go that way for all of us, doesn't it, Diana?
Oh, yeah. There's not a single person I know who does this solo or in a vacuum. People have a lot of weird backgrounds in this space. I've met a weird amount of therapists, which I'm sure says something.
They're like, I'm role-playing for work.
Yeah.
I'll role-play after work. It'll be fine. I mean, and as the person whose AKA is literally Jote Maniac,
It's true.
I multi-class in everything. I've just resigned. I don't plan to be great at anything, but I'm going to be good at a lot of things.
That's the way to go.
I'm not good at a lot of things, but I try. So, all right, Dennis. So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got into the TTRPG space?
Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, the short version is kind of the same story as everyone else. I'm a nerd who started off with video games as a launching off point. Someone came into my life and said, hey, you should watch Critical Role. And I did. And now I'm here as the short version. I started back when I was in, I want to say early middle school, maybe. And some internet friends of mine that I had met playing Minecraft, of all things, I'm sure they're listening now, came up to me one day and they were like, hey, Diana, have you ever played D&D? And I was like, I have no idea what that is. And then they pointed me to Critical Role, a single YouTube video on how to create a character. And they were like, all right, watch these, meet us here next week. And then from there on out, I was hooked. I think I maybe played 2 or 3 sessions within that game, then immediately started, making my own worlds. And since then, I've been kind of transitioning into the content space where I now teach other people how to be a DM the easy way, with particular emphasis on trying to make sure that, oh God, I hesitate to use the word, the Mercer effect or the Brendan Lee Mulligan effect. And
right.
I hate saying that I'm trying to undo that because it feels really offensive. And I've met at least Mercer and he's like the sweetest human being and I don't want to like put that on him. But at the same time, I've been told a lot of times that it's just like taking these high level concepts that people see in shows like Critical Role or in really theatrical performances related to TTRPGs and breaking it down into components and formulas and giving those to my audience. So
yes,
that's what I do now.
If it helps, that is 100% how we have described your content to each other. In the sense that it's like, well, because you think like and I'm going to age myself in a super interesting way because I'm almost sure that I started playing before you were alive.
Probably.
I started very young and it's fine. It just is what it is. But the idea that like, because I also look at that in like a lot of professional settings, it's very difficult to bridge the gap between having decades of knowledge and someone being like, what is the thing you're doing?
Yeah.
You're like,
yep.
Oh, I don't know. You can join and hopefully you'll catch up. But yeah, like your content is meeting people where they are because there's so many people joining this still, like day in, day out, people learning what D&D is, finding it interesting, finding it as a safe place for them or a place to find new friends or countless other things. And like you mentioned, so many therapists and every character is a piece of yourself. Like there's no arguing that. I'm sure there is arguing it, but I'm not going to listen to that argument because I don't think it's true. So yeah, your content is fantastic. And it's like I said, it's meeting people where they are, and I think that's one of the reasons it's so successful.
Yeah. We need less dice fudging discourse and more demystifying DMing discourse.
I won't even go near the dice fudging thing. I refuse to comment.
Agreed.
Listen,
Agreed.
People will believe what they want about whether or not I fudge my rolls, and I will not acknowledge the rumors. But yeah, I find that a lot of people who get into D&D come from a video game type, like nerdy standpoint or background or whatever, and that same Venn diagram of people who are into video games is people who are into D&D is just a circle. And then when you throw in the whole people who are typically, the type A type personalities, people who are very formulaic, they don't feel like they're the creative types. It's the exact same thing. It's very the whole field, I'm going to say field here because it's a field to me. The whole hobby is very saturated with people who are very analytical. You got engineers, you got people who are developers, things like that. And they look at something like Critical Role that's very theatrical, that's got a lot of role play emphasis, that's got a lot of storyline to it, and they look at that and that's their inspiration, but they feel like they can't do it. And I'm here to basically tell them that they can. And really, it's just there's another formula beneath it all.
I love the new influx because I don't know what year it was, and it's really because I block it out and I don't want to think about it. But if we're being honest, but there was a huge debate about like how perfectly balanced your dice were. To the point where like people were demonstrating like how to scientifically test at home.
They're floating them,
basically.
Right?
You get the salinity of water to get to a point at which the dice float, and then you spin the dice in the saline water or, salt water to see if it randomizes or if you're getting more consistently some stuff. But I love that we've moved to a point where it's like, my dice are huge. There's liquid in the Eye of Sauron inside of it. It's amazing. And you're just like, please, thank you. Please and thank you. So like the constant influx of new ideas is the only reason the hobby continues.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. And yes, please, dice are dice. It's not a big deal.
Isn't it?
Even in the first, so we'll go all the way back to a history lesson. In the first edition, they were so successful that they ran out of dice.
Really?
And they couldn't get them produced fast enough. Their alternative was to literally have 20 little pieces of card with the numbers 1 through 20 that you would basically put into a hat or a bag and pull out what you roll.
The Dark Ages, basically.
Yeah. So we could all come on, from the earliest days, just let the dice be what they are.
It's crazy.
100%.
They bought them from like a teacher supply store. He found them in some teacher supply store because they had like different shapes and they were meant to help like with probability and math. Anyway, that's where he found them. They weren't like purpose built for role playing. He just kind of settled on those. Kind of crazy.
And now they're like works of art. It's crazy. I know so
yeah.
many dice makers, and they are just doing crazy things with dice now. Someone just came out with a version of a set of polyhedral dice that are a combination of the geode style and liquid core. So it's got like this rocky sort of like painted in gemstone interior. So it looks like you cracked through
And
a geode
liquid.
and a liquid core in the middle of that. It's every day is an adventure in the dice world, and every day is a strain on my credit card.
Yeah. These are the reasons sometimes I avoid the internet for two reasons. Social media mainly, and I like my money where it's at.
Oh yeah, even I avoid social
You'll buy
media.
too many things. Yeah. Okay. So, is there anything that you are currently working on, Diana, that you can tell us about? New shows in the works, games you're running, streams that you have scheduled, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah. As of right now, my biggest stuff is my solo content, which kind of like we just talked about is very educational in nature, also a little bit just like silly, goofy, haha stuff when I come up with it. And I can be found absolutely everywhere at all times as at Diana of the Rose on any socials. So, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, unfortunately. And then lately I've been a Twitch streamer as well. So Monday through Wednesday from 5 to at least 6:30, 7-ish on whatever the Pacific Standard Time or Daylight Time is at the moment. I go through and I answer people's questions about things like D&D and TTRPGs in general, content creation, things like that. So that's always my biggest thing. I recently became Twitch partner, so we're kind of still celebrating that.
Nice.
And then as far as like bigger projects and bigger appearances, I'm going to be at a decent amount of cons this year. The next one upcoming is going to be Gen Con, where I have a guest spot on a panel called Integrating Player-Driven World Building in Tabletop Role-Playing Games. It's going to be Sunday at noon for those who are attending. Local time, so that'd be in Indianapolis. And then beyond that, I'll also be at PAX West, PAX Unplugged, coming back around to PAX East next year, so all the PAXs. It's going to be a good time. I'm going to be around. I have very distinct hair, so if anyone ever sees me, please come say hi. But that's my big
Unless
thing
you
right
change
now.
it between now and then, I guess, right?
I thought about it. I honestly sat down. I made a couple Pinterest boards. And then I realized there was no way. I just can't. At this point, it's too recognizable. People have done fan art. I can't let the fans down.
Ooh, yeah.
You see, it's the top of your head and the bottom of mine that feels. It's the Bob Ross effect.
Oh yeah.
Fun fact: that's a perm, and he wasn't able to get rid of it because it became too iconic too fast. He actually did the perm to save money because he didn't want to get multiple haircuts, only to have it become so iconic that he then had to perm his hair permanently, basically. And he's like, I don't want to. And everyone was like, that sucks, but you can't change it.
Doesn't
Sorry.
his son have the same hair now too?
Yeah, super similar.
Wild. Yeah.
All right, surprise question.
Yeah, you put this on the roster and I was a little bit nervous.
Well, it's okay. With the power of editing, all of our surprise questions sound perfect. So the one that keeps coming to mind, because I think there's two that keep coming to mind, and I will pick the other one. All right. So if you had the ability to cast one spell in your real life, what would it be?
This is a very hard one for anyone who's not an animal nerd, but given that I have a zoology major and things like that, speak with animals has to be it. Because there's a certain point where it'd just be good for animals in general, on a grand ambassador, best thing that we could do for science and conservation and things like that sort of level. Being able to speak with animals and, I don't know, it'd be fun. I could be an animal whisperer, but like a real one instead of the fake ones. That'd be sick.
I love that. And like, listeners, my background currently is Rick's garage, and then it made me think of the scene where Morty starts listening to the squirrels, and they're like upsetting governments, and come to find out like they are the Illuminati equivalent of the world, and that's immediately what I thought of.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I mean, honestly, whenever I was asked as a kid, like, what superpower would you have if you could choose? And I know that there's a bunch of really cool spells on there. Obviously, I'm sure Wish is probably the biggest one. And yeah, sure, fine, great. Basic, though. I'd rather just be able to talk to a pet every once in a while.
My answer is always tempered by two things. One, general cynicism of the idea that if I had something that was like, if I suddenly become the person with that much power, like having to deal with like governments wanting access to me and things like that. So like I lean heavily away from the idea of Wish. Yeah. And then the second is to honor my father. His answer was always to be able to speak every language.
Oh, that's a good one.
Because like you just become a Rosetta Stone. Like you're no doubt famous, sought after, but it's not the same thing as like I can cast these maelstroms, or I can grant wishes, or I can true polymorph you into a younger version and basically grant pseudo immortality. It's just I can read everything and I could talk to everybody.
Yeah. Anyone could do it if they wanted to dedicate time to it. You just got a shortcut.
Yeah. And so, or the idea of like world traveling and being able to just directly communicate with everybody in their native tongue. Like, so always my answer.
And being able to read all the dead languages out there with like the records we have, that would be
That's
intense.
true.
Like,
I just imagine going to the Rosetta Stone for the first time and be like, you guys are so wrong. So very wrong.
That's a good one.
Derek, what do you got?
I'm a softie. I was thinking I might do one of those Acquisition Incorporated spells where you can like double something in value and convince someone of it and like sell it. But that's a little conny for me. I'm gonna go mass heal just because I feel like being able to just heal a bunch of people at least once a day would be something. The only problem is I know, like you, Neal, I'm too like focused on the realism. I know that like I would either get kidnapped or I would heal a bunch of people, and then a bunch of other people would actually need me more, and I would be conflicted, and it would just be terrible. So, but I don't know. That's my call.
Oh,
I often think of like magic, like if magic were to show up now, like the number of utilitarian uses that would end up happening of like, the water treatment plant is just a bunch of people that learn to purify food and drink. And like they have to like clock in and clock out every day.
Right.
And I'm like, I bummed myself out. I don't like talking.
Have you ever listened to Dispel Magic, Neal or Diana? It's a podcast. They basically do this where they like cover a spell each episode and then talk about like if this existed in a world like for real and people had access to it, what are the implications of this spell? Like Speak with Animals was that they would have cages on every corner with animals in them who could like witness every crime. That would be like the security system, and so you could talk to any animal who could tell you exactly who committed whatever crime. Like it's kind of your security system. Anyway, really funny show. Dispel Magic. You should go check it out. But that's what it reminds me of, kind of what we're doing here.
It's such a good use because you can't hack that.
Yeah,
because like you could hack CCTV, you can't hack a bunch of parents
unless you kill them, right?
Out there.
But like if they're well enough protected. Really funny though. Like if you sit there and think too hard about spells and like them being in a real world, how much they would actually affect things, it's hilarious.
Yeah. Oh my god, they have an episode for Druid's Grove here.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of Druid spells in general. This is so interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty funny stuff.
So there's no small segue, so I will try my best. But as we've alluded to multiple times, you do have a zoology degree, and it was one of the things that I had noted. So we have a long-standing series called RAAH, Real Monsters. This is actually the 20th episode in that series. So we threw it out to you, which, side note, it's where I learned my Roman numerals. For some dumb reason, I thought that would be a fun way to title all the episodes. Now I'm constantly like, is this right? I think this is right.
Are we on XX then? So if it's 20,
we are indeed. Yes.
Nice.
And so I had to look it all up, and we put it out to you as to which ones we had already used, and then we left it open ended, and you decided on the Flying Horror, which is from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. Okay. And so our question is always, especially when we're on almost episode 300, is like, what about that monster like drew you to it to say, you know what, this is the one I want to talk about?
Oh man. So this is one of the very few monsters that granted, as much as I'm a DM, I have very little real DM experience just due to the way that, campaigns fizzle and things like that. But when I do play games, I tend to lean towards a horror genre. So I run Curse of Strahd pretty regularly. I'm leaning into Eve of Ruin when it comes out, or now that it's come out, actually, once I have a spare 2 seconds to sit down with it. And the Flying Horror was one of the primary creatures that I used as like the final boss of the Death House, the prelude to Curse of Strahd. Because for those who have played through Death House before, it's a level 1 to 3 adventure that culminates in you fighting, I'm pretty sure, a shambling mount, which is great if it wasn't for the fact that it's CR5. So most people who play that module end up switching it out for something else. A gibbering mouther is usually what people swap it instead. And that's fine and all, but I really wanted to lean into like a body horror aspect. And when I was looking through the monster manual as written, a lot of WotC's things don't really go super far into super horrifying creatures, for obvious reasons, it can block out certain parts of their audience, so they don't really tread that path very often. But one of the things that I did see was, the flying horror, and then its cousins, the skittering horror, and I believe it's called the shadow horror or some such thing. And so I took that and I was like, this looks scary enough. I like the way those teeth look. I'm going to put this in here. And so that was my first experience with it. And I really wanted to talk about it because I feel like those supplemental sort of tangential things that are pulled in from other settings like Ravnica are often overlooked when it comes to podcasts like this. I wanted to shed some light on it.
Yeah. Part of me also wanted to make a joke and just start describing the magic card and lean really heavy into that and be like, oh no, what was I supposed to look up? But that's also another thing is there's a lot of really good art because it was a magic card. And what I find most interesting is multiple versions of this card were done by the same artist.
Oh.
So Adam Paquette is apparently the go-to person for drawing the flying horror. Cause I found an old one, I found the new one, all of those things. But yeah, these are super interesting, especially because, and I love that you chose it because the other two are much higher in CR. So it ends up being tough to implement those without either turning them down, doing it for a one shot on the glorious chance that you find yourself with a party of that level. But this at level 3, I think is awesome to add as, like you said, as the culminating of Death House, as just really ramping up the horror factor if that's what you're going for. Because it is super creepy looking.
I mean, the whole thing, especially looking at the art that they have from Ravnica specifically, it's got at least 6 appendages that all end in these insect-like protrusions. And of course, as a GM that leans really hard into body horror, when I ran it, I made it so that those, instead of looking so insect-like, looked human, where they were sheathed in skin and ended in shards of bone that just kind of punctured the ground as it walked. And then, the wings weren't actually made of this leathery skin-like substance. Instead, it was just woven sinew altogether. So I took the base skeleton of it, reflavored it a lot, but the one thing I didn't have to touch was the face on that thing, because it's got these two, it's basically eyeless eye sockets and they're empty voids. I think I made it in my game so they were covered by a thin layer of skin just for extra creep factor, but it's bald. It's got these bat-like ears and this horrific smile that's entirely too wide, entirely too toothy, and has no lips. So it's just the perfect culmination to this intro to a horror campaign.
Especially because based on the lore, there's nothing stopping you from letting this be the culmination of the fear of the players you have. PCs, players. Walk that fine line. Yeah. But the idea that the PC's fears could be manifesting this and giving it the strength, the Freddy Krueger principle and all that. But that's just wild to also the depths that you can go with it, because it has its frightening screech. And so what does the individual PC hear that fails that screech? What do they see in the sinew of the wings? What do they, what do they smell? If it's the embodiment of fear, let's go. Whatever I need it to be or want it to be. And honestly, I'm going to make them do that. Let's all be honest. That's the kind of fun thing where it's so what did you see? And you're yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I had written down over here.
And that's when you go into those, and especially for GMs, monsters like that, monsters like, an Ublex, which I just talked about on a different podcast recently, things like that, which give people an opportunity to go and take the reins of, you can, as the GM.
Oh, the Ublex. Because there's also a smaller one, Spawn of Ublex.
Yeah, the spawns were pretty much useless. They're a tiny CR1 creature, but the adult and elder ones are terrifying.
They still steal memories. And I had a player who had just done something really important and successful. And obviously that was the forefront of their mind. And I took that. And so then other PCs would bring that up and they'd be I have no idea what you're talking about. That never happened. So.
Oh yeah. But I mean, for GMs, especially newer GMs, that's just a thing that you can throw in there where you can hand the reins over to your players, sit back, scarf down snacks for 2 minutes while they monologue about some part of their past or some deep fear of theirs that maybe not everyone else at the table, above the table knows about them. And maybe it describes some of the reasons that they have these current personality traits, their upbringing, how they got their abilities, why they chose their aesthetic. Any little thing that can be kind of tossed over to the player as a narrative moment and give them a main character moment is just my favorite thing. And it turns combat into something that's more of a in-depth roleplay experience as opposed to just, oh yeah, I hit this thing and then I move back 10 feet and then I hit it again later. You know, like really that sort of integration is my favorite thing ever.
So from a zoology perspective, and maybe just like in game when you actually ran this thing, what you would do with this creature in an encounter, or what you did do with this creature in your encounter, to kind of spice things up based on its appearance and based on its stat block.
Oh, yeah. So in zoology, the concept of invasive species is pretty pervasive for obvious reasons. There's a lot of invasive species out there.
Us?
Yeah, us. Cats. Like at least 17 different aquatic creatures, you know, things like that.
Zebra mussels.
A billion different types. Yeah, exactly. The zebra mussels are huge. That is like a swear word in the zoology community.
Yeah, it's a big deal out here in the Western U.S. where we all live, so.
Yeah.
I took a drink at the wrong time. I was not prepared for the statement. Zebra mussels is a swear word. So.
Dude, scientists have some very strong opinions about a lot of things, and zebra mussels. It's zebra mussels and Watson and Crick that zoologists, biologists, everyone hates universally. But in any case, one of the things we talk about a lot is the concept of an invasive species and how they work. And essentially, almost universally across the board, whenever a new creature is introduced to an environment for the first time, it absolutely decimates anything that it possibly can. It becomes top of the food chain because things that already exist in that environment who haven't seen it before haven't evolved any defenses to it already. And so usually when I play the flying horror, I mean, it's an aberration. You know, it's functionally a man-made creature that shouldn't be here, shouldn't exist in the first place, especially looking the way it does. And so anytime it's introduced to a new environment, it has no reason not to just go absolutely ham and start destroying anything in a nearby area. And when you look at things like the fact that it has that frightening screech, it has different abilities that you can actually roll on a table to determine what peripheral stat block abilities that it has. It's got those claws, and it's also got a 60-foot fly speed. It is designed to be a perfect predator that is functionally unbeatable. And since it's man-made, it's introduced to whatever environment it's in. So it is just aggressive off the bat, the way I run it, which is a lot of fun and very terrifying for my players. Like, it was full on in the campaign that we ran and this encounter that we ran. It would fly towards someone with a 60-foot fly speed, you know, or 30 feet of their movement speed, attack them, functionally down them within a turn, and then go and spend another 30 feet to zoom up to someone else and start staring it down until it came back around to its turn again.
Yeah, speaking of movement, the only thing that I feel like it's missing for me is a climbing speed because of the insectoid nature of its legs. It feels to me like that would be the perfect way to hide it up on the roof of a cave, right? Wings folded in, just like up against the rock at the top of the cave. It's got a +7 stealth, right? That's like the only thing I feel like I would add is just like have it hanging out up there, bat-like, you know, just waiting, and then swoop down. So
I'm wondering, and I also look at the stat block, I always try and think about like the actual anatomy of these creatures, right?
Yeah.
And noticing that its claw attack is slashing damage and not piercing damage is really interesting to me. So maybe there's something there. Maybe its claws aren't actually like, maybe they're blunt end and it just kind of slices scythe style instead, for all I know.
Yeah, I love where we've all gone with the conversation because it's some of like the biggest pieces of advice that like I know I try and give is that you don't want it to just be a bag of hit points. I mean, there are times that's totally fine and it works that way, but once you start like asking yourself why, what are the synergies within this stat block? The one I think about is like basically it frightens someone and then it has advantage on frightened creatures.
Yep.
Like, but part of that is like, okay, because, you know, my headcanon, which is sometimes a little rough when you're like, hey, Watsy, I don't need to do this much headcanon work. Help me out next time. But for this one where the headcanon is like, it knows you're afraid. There is no way this creature doesn't 100% know who failed and is going to go attack them because then that's the person that is then the easiest to take down to then move to the next person, to the next one. And if anything, if I take them down, the fear that I instill in the other PCs is only heightened. And clearly that's what I'm going for here is as much fear as possible with this creature.
And then if you mix in the fact that it's like, it's got really high dexterity. So by default, it's an ambush predator. It's meant to hit fast and hard. And on the PC side of things, that negative feedback loop of, oh, I'm frightened, everything is going to get so much worse from here on out, is terrifying. This is why I mostly use this creature as like essentially a boss encounter. I feel like fighting multiple of them at the same time would be just downright terrifying. And especially when you couple that in with the optional rule where you can instill permanent forms of madness into your characters who experience this thing is wild.
The other one that I just am now like really soaking in is that the claws, they don't just do slashing damage. They also do psychic damage.
Oh, yeah.
Where you're just like, that's a fun little thing we can talk about, everybody. The claw went into you. What terrible memory have you been forced to relive in this moment? Because like, so what is, the whole concept or discussion of what even is psychic damage, nonetheless damage itself. But if I'm doing psychic damage, it's because of something. So like, what is that something? And it's certainly not the thing that you have to do every time it hits. It may be for the first time you hit a certain character and then they get to say it. And then it's just, perpetually reliving that singular moment that was brought to the forefront. But yeah, the idea that every combat can have the opportunity to have really important narrative moments that could echo out through just even after that combat, rather than our bag of hit points beat that bag of hit points, then took the bag of gold and then moved to the next bag of hit points.
I'm trying to teach myself to be better about making psychic damage not be just like, oh, you experience a headache for a little bit. And so it's something that I encourage people to do immensely. Maybe the flying horror, oh God, what's that creature in Harry Potter that turns into your worst fear?
Oh, the Boggart.
Yeah, maybe a Boggart style like turns into something that you desperately fear or would not want attacking you, and you just see nothing but that in that moment until the fear subsides. You can really play with it.
Yeah, this is one of those situations where you like make the face of the creature turn into the face of like one of your loved ones or your enemies or something. That's yeah. I mean, it's not really in the stat block, but that's a flavor I might add.
You better believe we're keeping those hollow eyes and them teeth, though.
Oh gosh, yeah. Can you imagine?
True. Yeah,
I can. Smile. Okay, I don't talk about this very much because it's not real. I mean, sometimes it doesn't always have an opportunity to come up. Usually it's like zany things, or it's like, oh, here's the thing I remember from Rick and Morty. What I will say is like Smile, one of the best horror movies in a long time. I'd give it about a 90%. I would say the final reveal could have been cut down in a different way, and I think it would have been all but perfect. But Smile is one of the creepiest movies I've seen because it basically is doing these sorts of psychic damage type things where you are seeing the people that you think are friends and relatives, and then they are twisted.
Yeah. Really leaning into the uncanny valley is like a cheat code when it comes to horror. That's why I like body horror so much, is things that like are smiles that are entirely too wide, like eyes that don't see too many of them, too few of them, anything like that. Same with limbs that are made of something that they shouldn't be or placed somewhere they shouldn't be. It's just the absolute easiest way to have a really memorable encounter with your characters.
So you mentioned it's just a CR3 creature, right? So the players or the characters maybe are going to be only level 3 at this point, but if someone is afraid and it's hitting with advantage and it's doing 22 on average with that attack, like you said, it very easily could down one or more characters within the first few rounds of a fight, which makes it that much worse.
I think I had to pull back the reins on this one a little bit. Even though it was 4 or 5 characters going up against this creature, it downed someone within, I think, 2 rounds. And then I had to switch to targeting the meteor, more higher hit point type characters. Because, I mean, if you look at it too, right, it will generally go towards whoever's frightened. It doesn't have that much intelligence. Its intelligence is a -4 modifier. So it's not going to try and target any particular class or any particular, like it's not going to target the healer or anything like that. So I used that a little bit to my advantage when I was the DM to kind of be like, oh, it just happens to go after the barbarian right now. Look at that. You guys have 2 rounds to fix this. Otherwise, it's going to start hitting indiscriminately again. That sort of thing.
Yeah. The DC 13 Wisdom save, too, is really tough at a level 3. Not a lot of wisdom-based characters in general.
Also, I just think of like the weird names that come up with the NPC that you didn't think that they were gonna belove, and it's like Snick Snack, the random kobold, or for what is my Gobby the Goblin is like with my kids' game.
Of course,
obviously, I'm not gonna. I say that with realizing what I'm going to say next. This makes me sound like an absolute monster. I don't intend to do this for my children's game. Imagine at my home table, not with my children. I'm 100% killing that NPC with this first. 100,000%.
Killing the terrible NPC you want to get rid of.
Yeah.
Or just like, or to establish like what this is without it being directly on a PC. Mm-hmm. So then you look at that creature. Is it the familiar? Is it the NPC? Is it something? Because then you can create that same feeling without it coming above the table as much. Because if you do that, just jump round one, surprise, no questions, a PC dies. Yes, it's going to get you the same response, but there's a potential that response will go above the table and be a little bit more aggressive. But if there's something there, is it their guide? Is it their, like, there's so many potential NPC options, and having it established like, oh no, this is a murder machine. Who is instilling fear and then basically eating that fear up. Oh no.
Yep.
And yeah, establishing that like right out the gate.
This is kind of one of those rare opportunities where I'd also narrate that first kill outside of combat, but still telling my players, oh, this thing, it does this screech. And then this is how much damage it hits with. And this is how much psychic damage it hits with. Now y'all can roll initiative, that sort of thing, especially because, like you mentioned earlier, I think it was Derek, who you mentioned that it has the capability of doing, 1d6 plus 5 slashing damage plus another 46 psychic damage, and really emphasizing that right out the gate and setting the tone for the rest of the combat is wild.
Yeah, on a crit, that's killing a character easy. If it's 44 damage, yeah.
Well, like you said, you're just static damage, which is where I tend to go because I'm speed of play and everything like that. That's 22, and that could have been 35, and then that could have been give you if you double the 30, so you could have gone to 65 damage on a crit with one claw.
Oh yeah, this is one of those encounters that I make sure to tell my players above the table before we get started. Everyone sits down, and then I'm like, hey, just as a friendly reminder, you guys can run if you want to. Anyway, Let's get into it.
For no particular reason.
Just letting you guys know that is an option.
So you mentioned, Diana, the additional stuff that what you could do for Madness and for some other features of Monster of the Encounter. So do you want to dive into those next?
Yeah, so essentially whenever a player character gets hit by the frightening screech by this creature, and all of the horrors in Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica have some effect to this end, you as the DM make a note of it, and you just remember that for later. And then after the fight is over, every character who was hit by this maddening screech has to make another saving throw. And if they save, it's fine. It's all good. Nothing happens. If they fail, then they gain some form of madness. And it starts off with like the typical short-term madness, which I believe goes away after a long rest, if I remember correctly. And then if they continue fighting creatures like this that instill madness, or they're in maddening scenarios, then it stacks over time and becomes a long-term form of madness that you roll for as the Dungeon Master. And then eventually it could become an indefinite form of madness. So it not only does it set the tone for the rest of the campaign, especially a horror campaign going forward, like Curse of Strahd, for example, if you were to place it in there, on like a purely descriptive level, like you as the GM are telling them, hey, by the way, this is what we're fighting, and we're going to fight more of these from now on. But even inside the game, there's a mechanic to kind of start seeding that madness and that extra level of, oh God, things are getting real starting now.
And this is your constant friendly reminder. Actually read the whole Dungeon Master's Guide, because this is in there. There's optional rules. There's all kinds of different things. You will be shocked to find if you actually read that from cover to cover. It's a lot of fun. It's tough though. I mean, it's one of the ones where that's going to be a discussion up front. That's going to be like everyone needs to be on board with the madness effects prior to implementing those, because those are not easy. That's not a small thing. Yeah. But like you said, if you're already establishing we're in Strahd, but it's not like, yay, glittery vampire Strahd. This is going to be terrifying. This is called Death House for a reason, and that's where we're starting. And as long as you're getting everybody really on board, I think layering in the madness effect is really, really good.
And this is kind of one of those obligatory sidebars when it comes to campaigns like this and creatures like this, ignoring the whole body horror thing and making sure your characters are okay with things like that.
Right.
I, for example, have played with characters before that have weird things about eyes, and so maybe having a creature that doesn't have eyes is kind of a no-no. So obviously, ask your player characters, especially when it comes to the madness mechanic, because that is something that can affect the course of a game. I believe there's some forms of madness that straight up change your player character's motivations and kind of takes away player agency in a way that not everyone is okay with. So just make sure everyone's cool with it. And then when they say yes, have fun.
But what I keep saying this because I never know how many episodes someone wants to listen to, so I never get afraid of also reiterating certain pieces of advice that I feel are really important. It is not that your characters need to have had, or players need to have had, a good time. They need to have felt safe the whole time, though, because some of these things are like, you're dealing with the trauma that is in the game. You're dealing with the harrowing experiences, but you're still coming out on top. But trudging through this desert, battling day in and day out against horrors that look like this thing, it doesn't, it's not like high adventure fun, but everyone could still have a good time and feel safe the whole time. So that is, I keep trying to put that one out there. Everyone doesn't have to walk away and be like, yay, woohoo. But as long as they felt safe through the whole thing, then, and you're culminating towards something, I think is the key.
And I could go on a whole separate podcast about safety tools and things like that. But in the end, my player characters came up to me after this encounter and they were like, hey, Diana, thanks for that. That was awesome. I'm going to have nightmares in real life now. And I'm like, perfect. Job done.
It's good.
Yeah, the madness tables in the DMG are no joke. And I would probably amend these heavily if I was going to use them.
The other one is the additional primary and secondary features, which was just like, I didn't have a huge problem with the difficulty of the creature as it stood, but I guess if I did, here are some options. Like, hey, if you hit me, then I just kind of mess with your mind and give you psychic rebuke as an option. Where, basically emitting psychic energy when they're hit with an attack. Mm-hmm. And each creature takes psychic damage in that area. Just
automatically.
Yeah.
There's also one that gives it spell casting, and so it can cast darkness, and which is just a terrifying thought. There's also another one, a secondary feature that gives it something called Mind Sight, where if you choose, you can customize your horror to make it so that magical darkness doesn't impede its own dark vision. So if you take that in combination with the fact that it could potentially cast darkness, that I feel like at that point it's a little bit more than a CR3, so be careful with that one, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, the adding grappling, being immune to being charmed, a lot of dangerous stuff here. Yeah, this would definitely bump it up, probably a couple.
Avoidance, where basically you're giving it it takes half damage or no damage based on successful saves, like just.
And it's got a 16 AC out the box too, right? 16 AC and 49 hit points is not a joke.
You have to have it come back throughout the campaign. It keeps showing up because they're still afraid.
Oh yeah,
and they're still giving it power.
It can get stronger and stronger.
And you're adding additional features. Imagine it shows back up and immediately uses the grasping tendrils to pull someone into it.
God, this thing could easily be modified to be BBG. If you really, and that's what I love is creatures that aren't just a stack of hit points are very easy to form one shots and, side quests around just on their own. They're so formidable. They have so much flavor to them. It's so much fun.
Yeah. This would be like the pet.
Yeah.
Sends it after you every once in a while. Mm-hmm. In the throne room. They're like stroking its head, while they're monologuing to you.
And that's where you can kind of go into the whole psychological side of being a DM, where you start to narrate how these characters who have fought this thing before and barely survived now have this almost PTSD with respect to actual PTSD and safety tools and things like that. When they see this creature, what are they going to feel? How are they going to react? You have control over that as a DM. And that makes for really good flavor.
This is an interesting question. And we always put it in there, and I don't know if I remembered. I think I put it in the outline. But the idea of homework. What is something that someone could go read, they could go watch, they could go experience that would help them with the conversation that we've had? What's something that, like, what's the first thing that came to your mind? Like, I've already mentioned the idea of, like, going and watching Smile because it really focuses more on the psychological aspects of horror. Yeah.
For me, it's Alien. I feel like that's a classic example. This very much gives me, stuck in the Nostromo vibes with something, and we don't know what it is, and it's just like killing us off slowly. There's obviously a whole Alien TTRPG that I would love to play someday. That is kind of purpose built for that. But I feel like that would be some good inspiration on how to weave this thing into an interesting dungeon or encounter.
Oh, 100%. It could be a perfect analog. You can even take minor storylines from that whole Alien franchise and convert it to D&D using this thing as the main creature, and it'd be so much fun. When it comes to me and how I run things, I tend to look at art and things like that as inspiration for like the nuclei that I then build the story out from. Obviously, anything to do with the Ravnica, like Magic the Gathering setting would probably be a good start if you're looking for more lore or more potential integrations with other creatures that are kind of built to be in the same universe. So looking at Magic the Gathering cards is always something I recommend people do. There's a website called Scryfall that has like full on a compendium of every Magic the Gathering card ever. And I'll often go in and look at the art for those things. And especially horrors, there's a bunch of different variants of them. And so maybe you can use those and the way that they look, the art for them, as different variants of the flying horror and modify the stat block to make it seem appropriate. As far as body horror in general goes, I know Scorn came out semi-recently, and I say that hesitantly because I have a terrible sense of time when it comes to release dates, but that tends to use a lot of the similar sort of that body part shouldn't be there type vibe, as does The Forest, so you can look at the creatures in The Forest. The other thing I recommend is the SCP Wiki. Obviously, very internet famous, a fantastic source of inspiration for how things would realistically act. So kind of going off of the same vibe where I take a zoology background and apply that to the way that creatures would behave in D&D. The SCP Wiki does a very similar thing where it's very realistic, very scientific, and very well analyzed and traces back to things that are actual physical components of the creature itself. If it has this very stabby looking appendage, how does it use that to hunt? So taking that as inspiration is also something that I strongly recommend people do.
Another one to throw out there, this isn't that helpful per se, but MTG Random.
Ooh.
And it literally just gives you a random Magic the Gathering card. It's a fun way to, like, sometimes when I just can't think of ideas, I'll literally go to a website like that and be like, something's in here. As much amazing art and like flavor texts as are on these cards. Yeah. Something's got to spark it in me.
And it's such short, like little blurbs. If you don't like it, you move on. You haven't lost that much time. It's such a good tool. Yeah,
there's countless reasons that we will undoubtedly ask you to come back on. Is it safety tools? Is it more zoology? Is it you're just our go-to person for more raw, real monsters? But I know I had a great time, and we will absolutely have you back on.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. I love being able to spout out about obscure knowledge that I haven't been able to use my degree for in 4 years. So this makes it all worth it.
As always, we just want to thank Diana again for coming on, spending some time with us, and just having a fantastic time talking about a truly terrifying creature.
I am going to have nightmares for weeks. A reminder, listeners, to go fill out the listener survey. We want to know more about what you want to hear from us, what kind of episodes you've enjoyed, which ones you don't enjoy so much, so we can continue to make the show better. And again, as a reminder, listeners will be entered to win a $25 gift card from Adventure Dice. We're giving away 2 of those. And you can double your entries by reviewing the show, whether on iTunes or on Podbean or on Podchaser.
And of course, if you want to reach out to us and tell us how you've been using horrors in your games, you can always email us at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. And of course, you can leave us a review like was just discussed, anywhere that pods are caught. Yes.
We have an upcoming mailbag episode in the next few weeks, so be sure to get your questions in, your comments in, your love letters in, whatever it be that your heart tells you to tell us.
And of course, if you go to social media, good on you. I'm proud of you. That's not fun. But we're there, and maybe something we're posting is fun. And you can pretty much find us anywhere by looking either up Dungeon Masters Block or DMS_block.
The Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network. Check out some other great shows like Detentions and Dragons and How Not to DM, and more.
And as always, thank you for listening to the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing gods,
Killing characters,
and lowering the egos of everyone else at the table. I'm DM Neal. Good night and good luck.
I'm DM Derrick. May the Force be with you, and keep on Dungeon Mastering.
It's not inspiration, it's not wisdom, and it's bad advice.
You know what else is a flying horror? Bees. Just release them in your game.
Oh, man.